Welcome to the Europaeum Scholars program. We are the project group Unmute the Youth, and in this podcast we're going to talk about how we work together as a group to produce a policy report for improving young people's participation in democracy. Before we start though, let's explain what the Europaeum is all about. The Europaeum Scholars program is a cooperation between PhD students from across Europe. Its goal is to create a bridge between academia and policy making. Our project group proposed recommendations for policymakers for how they can improve young people's participation in policymaking. In this podcast, we're going to speak about our experiences working together over the past 1.5 years. At the beginning of the project, each participant was asked to propose a group project for something that they thought should be done in Europe. My name is Lukas. I'm from Leiden University in the Netherlands, and my original proposal was about an EU policy package for restoring young people's trust. Carlotta, do you recall what your proposal was all about?
Yes, actually, thanks, Lukas. My name is Carlotta. I'm from the University of Bologna, and I wanted to do something very different from my PhD project, as I work on EU foreign policy. But as the first months of, pandemic unfolded, I started to reflect so much about how Europe had changed since its birth. So I wanted to focus on political participation of young people today in Europe. And somehow this was also broadly linked to what Ale wanted to do.
Yes, thank you, Carlotta. My name is Alessandro, and I'm from the Graduate Institute in Geneva. And I was interested in Europaeum for bringing a sort of more local perspective. Indeed, both in my PhD and for my proposal, I selected something related to regional administration and regional governance. Indeed, my original proposal was to write a sort of manifesto or a publication with some recommendation for social cohesion policy, and how to reduce the inequalities between territories in the European Union. And with this, I'll launch the ball to George.
Thanks, Ale. I'm George. I'm based at the University of Oxford. My initial proposal was pretty wide in its scope initially. It was about how we can find out why liberalism is no longer in the vogue, what has gone wrong with liberalism, and with its appeal especially to the middle class. And my proposal was actually identify what the problem is through empirical research and through a review of the literature. And as we identify what the key factor is in liberalism losing appeal, try to rectify that problem. And with that, I pass the ball on to Simon.
My idea was quite similar to George. I was very worried about the decreasing democratic attitudes, especially among the young. And I was thinking about civic education initiatives and initiatives that could promote democratic participation. Even though it might seem that our proposals were quite different, they actually had some common ground. And this common ground was also shared with additional members who couldn't be here today, Elodie and Alice. And that was that they all centered around regaining trust in liberal democracy. That is, specifically, young people had to regain trust in democracy. And everyone were also intuitively looking at the EU. So we were thinking that a solution had to be found on a European level.
Do you still remember how we actually had to learn how to work together online?
Yeah, I think this was kind of the first very big step we had to do, because we had never met each other and we didn't really know how to do. We had like glimpses of other people's daily life in our webcams without literally knowing nothing about each other. Very different styles.
Yes, and also just the fact of having to start out a collaboration online. Like, we all just started using like tools as Zoom, and it was very, very strange. It was a very strange procedure and very strange trying to get that human contact and trying to sense other people.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And we've got all these intensive modules every 2 months, 4 or 5 days modules. And it was one of the main obstacles and one of the main impediments towards this process was the lack of physical interaction. because this made it extremely tough to create personal bonds, the sorts of ones that you need for an annual project, for an ongoing project of the scale that we had to deal with.
Though I was impressed with the way that we in the end arrived at, a first idea of what we want to accomplish. And I think that was at the Prague module in September 2020 when we had the first consensus on that we wanted to do something with young people and connect them to public administration. And I think back then we were thinking about designing a tool to accomplish that. But somehow then our progress stalled a bit, and I think we were all very much hung up on what we actually wanted to do. What was that like again?
I think that the crazy part was that we were going into the winter and we didn't know with the second wave, of pandemic how this was supposed to look like. And we had this first, hint of this is what we wanted to do. But then we very quickly realized that there were so many things we had to kind of dig into to really understand what we wanted to do. I don't know if you remember, Simon, how many the endless conversations and discussions once a week on so many different topics.
Oh yeah. Well, I definitely remember them. Like me and George especially were talking about deliberative democracy and e-democracy, the difference between the two, how they might be useful. And it was all very abstract. And I remember a great supervisor who kept returning us to core questions such as, what is your goal?
And after months, we had this, I think 2 or 3 lines of aim. And that was our, great results. And now we know what we are going to do, and it was, ridiculous, but also very important at the same time because it took so long to arrive there, but we actually arrived.
If you recall, people were extremely ambitious at the start. We were talking about a tool that would actually help energize young people across Europe.
When we reached Leiden, which was a very important module, a very important part of the program, Europaeum Scholars program, then we really had to make some important decisions.
The original idea was to develop a tool, a sort of website or maybe an app. But the originator of this idea dropped off. And that was really, really a watershed. Because as a group, we had to redefine basically the identity of the group, our mission. So we decided to go for recommendation instead of a tool. It meant to lower down the ambitions, but at the same time to produce something more concrete.
So after we decided that a tool was not in the cards, time was getting tight. For the last 2 modules, we had to split it up into different subgroups to get all the work done at the same time. I remember one very big project that we had was to conduct a survey. The idea behind the survey was that we would interview or consult young people in 3 cities in Europe, namely in Leiden, in Trieste, and in Krakow, and try to learn more about how they want to interact with policymakers. In this respect, Elodie was really crucial, right? Elodie did a terrific job, and she had lots of experience setting up the entire survey. Without her, that part wouldn't have been possible. George, what group were you in again?
I was in the literature review group, actually, in which we tried to look at various initiatives in e-participation platforms across the globe, like the Better Reykjavik platform and obviously Reykjavik, or Invite Taiwan, which is based in Taiwan, and see what were the key takeaways of these successful platforms. So what were the lessons to be learned out of how to make a successful e-participation engagement using online tools.
That the strength of this part of when we started working together at that point of the program was that we wanted to kind of connect the research, the literature review, and the interviews with experts as we did with kind of practical case studies. Because the idea to develop a survey was, of course, to get into contact with young people, to listen up to the people we wanted to talk about and provide, recommendation for. But we were also very interested in providing case studies that could somehow reflect not only our group, because we come from different parts of Europe and different countries, and many of us, for example, have a nationality but then study and do their PhD in another country. But we also wanted to provide a kind of reflection of what Europe looks like. And so we chose 3 different case studies to, give the idea of how different but also how similar places in Europe can be. And I don't know if Ale wants to jump in on that, because he was one of the key players of the case study team.
Thank you. Yes, in that moment was particularly dynamic, because to do the background research on Gen Z, as we said, to focus on the concepts and thinking about the practicalities of these case studies, with, for example, in Trieste with election running, the survey running. And at that point, it was already the summer, and the time was starting to shorten, and it was really the time to collect all the outputs and the results of our kind of concrete research and draft something.
I was thinking, wasn't that also the time when we came up with that idea of calling the project Unmute the Youth? Because there was this whole topic that we'd been working on online on Zoom for the entire project, and that this entire term of unmute had been very much what this COVID experience had been like for many people and for many young people, and how we thought that calling it Unmute the Youth when we have a project that's about to give people a voice is actually something that nicely links up. And I think actually during the summer that was the only feasible progress that we met. Like, we did not actually start writing anything before the final module, right? That was really crunch time. Simon, what is your recollection of the last module?
Well, I think it was extremely hectic, but it was also something that left like a really nice impression on me, in the sense that like we were just this group of dynamic people who were working together and jumping in and out of Zoom rooms, working on drafts 2 and 2, and then discussing them, getting feedback, and like really quickly in a really short while we really had like a whole policy paper, and it was extraordinary. It seemed like it popped out of nowhere.
The last module was something incredible, because we were working as a real network and as a real teamwork, and I have this exciting memory of realizing that the job was almost done, and it was a very last rush. And I think Carlotta is the best person to describe that feeling.
But I think it was kind of a very well balanced. We had different styles, but I think that at the end, we kind of very well managed to put together kind of alternating moments of very neat and deep down work, because we actually had to produce something. And other moments in which I don't want to say chaos, because we were never chaotic, but I remember I think it was an hour before the deadline, we were talking about the final document, and I was kind of doing the bibliography, and I was having like parallel conversation with one of 2 people in the team, and there at the same time we're trying to work it on someone else. So we had these direct channels on Zoom in which we mixed up all the messages, and at the end, it was great to see that it happened.
Yeah. So now looking back at the entire project, what would you say? What have we taken from it? What have we learned from it?
For me, one of the most important, apart from, of course, all the recommendations that we hope a lot of people will read, I really have learned how to work in teamwork. This was the most important experience in my life in working as a teamwork, and it is incredible because it was remotely.
I think one thing that was really interesting was to see the dynamic on Zoom, because when you're really enthusiastic about something, and maybe you have at least slightly diverging views because you come from at least slightly different points of view, then you will tend to kind of, argue, you will tend to kind of get wordy. But here on Zoom, you can't really talk over each other, so you have to let each other speak a bit more and I think that was kind of interesting to see.
And also in general, just working online in the sense of what you can discuss in a Zoom call, and where it is maybe better to leave things over to individual people, give them a mandate and say, you draw something up and we will discuss that later. I think we also saw how important it is to have trust in people to work autonomously to bring a group project forward. And that's really something that stuck with me.
Another thing I was thinking is that we were also, it worked out pretty well how we managed to arrange also the different, we had all kind of periods that were busier than others. And what really also stayed with me was that we kind of managed to be a group of incredibly understanding people, like trying to understand that we were living this together, and it was intense for everyone. But also, of course, as we were like peeping into the private life of each other through our screens, we kind of also learned that everyone can have busy period or not, and everyone was so absolutely understanding with one another. And I think this is also another thing that at least will stay with me, because I'm sure that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah. And one last thing that I was thinking about was how we needed to compromise and bring together all the different academic and non-academic cultures coming from different places. From Italy, Germany, Denmark, Greece, and how we needed to bring together our academic and non-academic, as I said, cultures in all these projects, the different paces on which we worked. And finally, it all came together, as we said, during the last week, everything came together. And the atmosphere until then was so collegial and so understanding, as just Carlotta said.
Thank you very much for listening to this podcast by the group Unmute the Youth. We're looking forward to meeting you at the final Europaeum conference in Toledo.